Not too long ago, I was running some Nightfall strikes, mainly for one of my friends that was really interested in the Hung Jury, and although I had very little interest in this weapon, I stumbled upon what I think might be one of the best rolls possible on it. My roll has arrowhead break, steady rounds, moving target, box breathing, and a stability masterwork. I think that individually the Hung Jury is the best 180 RPM scout rifle, but unfortunately that doesn't mean a whole lot. This archetype really is overshadowed by so much, I think, especially the fact that there's a hand cannon archetype that kind of mimics it in just a more versatile, better way for more aggressive play. The Hung Jury stats are pretty nice. It's got a very healthy stat package that's boosted by its variety of perks and masterworks. However, that's not the main thing that makes this weapon stand out, I don't think. It's really its trait perks that truly set it apart from the other 180 RPM scouts. On my roll, I got moving target and box breathing. I think the two perks you absolutely want on this weapon. But although this weapon has great sights in my opinion, I love the sights on this weapon, it has a less than ideal zoom value of 2.2 times, and that's higher than the ideal scout zoom level of just 2 times, like on the Mida, or even on the Vision of Confluence and the Royal Chase, I believe, which are other 180 RPM scout rifles. The difference on those weapons, like the Vision of Confluence, probably the best contender for this scout rifle, is they don't exactly have fantastic perks. They don't have crazy standout perks like the Hung Jury has. Vision of Confluence does have things, I guess, like Surplus or Killing Wind in its first slot, and I guess it has Kill Clip or Full Auto, which is nice, but those, in my opinion, aren't as strong as something like Moving Target or Box Breathing, which are neutral benefits that go a really long way. Moving Target and Box Breathing are more impactful than a lot of these perks in an endgame PvP setting, mainly for trials, or at least in 3v3 play, and you can make an argument that Vision of Confluence with the right role, like Killing Wind and Kill Clip, could maybe be more explosive and better in 6v6 play. But when I'm being critical about a weapon, I'm typically not looking for its pub stomping ability, I'm looking for its viability at endgame PvP in a more organized scenario, and typically when you have a weapon that can perform there, it can also still perform pretty decently in 6v6. So although Hung Jury does have some phenomenal perks, again, it's not without trade-off, which is really unfortunate for the scout rifle archetype that desperately needs help, because pretty much everything in the sandbox feels like it steps on these scout rifles and just destroys them. I want to go in depth with my roll just a little bit more again. I chose Arrowhead Break because it gives us plus 25 recoil direction and some handling. The Hung Jury is just 25 off of 100 recoil direction, so that's great, and that will bring it to 100 to give it the best consistency in its recoil possible. And then on top of that, you're getting handling. I think handling and stability, as well as recoil direction and aim assist, those are our key 4 main stats on a scout rifle. I think we want to make it feel as close to Mida as possible. I feel like Mida is our golden seal of scout rifles, the thing that we're trying to mimic, the pinnacle of scouts in my opinion. So for that, we're going to need some nice handling and of course take the recoil direction with that. So Arrowhead seems to be the best in that slot. In the next slot, I take steady rounds. I don't think range is a problem on scouts at all, and I don't think you need any more, especially when you have 2.2 times zoom. So we're going to try and just max out the stability, even though it's costing us just a bit of range, which ultimately I don't think is going to make a difference. I go for a stability masterwork. I think a handling masterwork would have been better, but stability is also very good. I find that stability seems to really help scout rifles and my shot with them at least, because you get an easier time staying on target, and when you get flinched, that gets much harder to do, especially with scout rifles. So I think any little bit of help to stay on target is valuable. Lastly, as I mentioned, I went from moving target and box breathing. I think these are absolutely the best perks to be getting on this weapon. Moving target boosts your aim assist stat from 67 to 77 while ADSing, and of course if you're using a targeting mod, that's going to bring it to 87, so that's pretty high. If you're using 2, it's going to bring it even higher than that, so that's excellent. It also gives you better strafe speed, again working towards that Mida type feeling, giving us better strafe speed and ADS walking speed, which is excellent. And then that's going to pair and synergize really well with box breathing, where box breathing gives us a damage buff on our first shot after ADSing for a short period of time. you have to be ADS for 1.5 seconds, which is a healthy bit of time, but it does boost our damage, I believe, by 60%, which is pretty strong. That's enough for us to 3-tap. That is the NF 3-tap time to kill, that 0.67 second optimal time to kill if you get 3 headshots with your box breathing shot. So considering that does not take a kill to do, that is, in my opinion, the very best perk for PvP you get on this weapon. And again, it has great synergy with moving target, because while you're ADSing, you're going to be able to move around just a little faster, peek corners just a little faster. It's going to help moving target and having to hold your ADS not be quite as jarring at the least. Now, was this roll enough to feel like this 180 RPM scout rifle has a place, has a decent competitive place, at least like kind of like B tier place in the metagame as an off meta option? I don't know. I don't think it was enough. I think that this scout felt a lot better than I thought it would, but it just still feels so far behind everything else. Box breathing is really, really cool. Being able to 3-tap without a damage buff is pretty amazing. However, that just didn't feel like it came up a lot. Simply because a lot of the time in 6s, it's too chaotic to kind of lane and try and get all 3 headshots on someone and make sure that you're landing that first initial shot on the head. Remember, you cannot 3-tap if you don't land that first initial shot. It has to be that first initial shot that lands for that damage boost, and then 2 headshots to follow. So it's actually some pretty steep requirements. And in 6s, I feel like it's a little too chaotic to have that happen frequently. Even in my gameplay, I didn't feel like I was really getting that off a lot, so much as I was just trying to play smart with the weapon. In trials, I can see this coming up a lot more, but what I noticed is when you shoot someone and you hit your big damage on them, they pretty much just instinctively immediately back off. A good player doesn't kind of overcommit to that kind of damage and that rate of fire, so a lot of the time you're not getting that 3-tap. Sure, you're getting a little bit higher damage that competes with the 120 RPM hand cannons, but that begs the question, why not just use a 120 RPM hand cannon then? The argument then is going to be, well, your time to kill with this weapon is so much faster, it's 0.67. But I don't know, at the end of the day, that 0.67 takes a lot. You have to be really on point to get that. You have to hit that first shot, they have to be overextended enough for you to hit the next 2 shots. And with the zoom level on this weapon, it's not the most forgiving in most scenarios in like mid-range. So again, I'll give this weapon credit where it's due. It felt a lot better than I thought it would, and I feel like there's something there for it, but unfortunately, I just think this weapon archetype just is too hard to make use of that 3-tap. It's too difficult, in my opinion, to do it frequently, at least in the majority of the time. And then there's so many weapon archetypes in this game that feel like it just step all over it. This weapon archetype has a 1 second optimal time to kill. That's the same as the 120 RPM hand cannons, but they deal so much less damage per shot. And that's a problem. That's problematic because people aren't going to overcommit like that. And it's harder to land those headshots because of the flinch that scouts receive, especially from high damage weapons like 120 RPM hand cannons. So it's actually harder to land those shots, and because of the zoom level, it just adds on to how jarring it is. This archetype was solved by adding precision hand cannons, who have an inherent benefit, not like the precision frame. The precision frame on the Hung Jury gives it an inherent counterbalance mod. It's like the counterbalance perk from D1 even, whereas the precision hand cannons get inherently higher accuracy. Accuracy, in my opinion, goes a way further down the line impact than the benefit of just a counterbalance mod. And on top of that, you only have 1.4 times zoom, so it's a lot more forgiving, like hand cannons are, and on top of it, a lot more versatile. It still does decently-ish at range, but within that mid to long range, it is just amazing and terribly consistent. You pair that with something like high cals on the Epitaph, and while you're flinching people a ton, you have mega consistent shots, and it's really, really versatile. It just does everything better than these scout rifles do, and it's nearly the same weapon. So what place do these scouts have? Compared to 120s, they get outclassed because they have the same optimal time to kill, yet like I said, lower damage output. And then you compare this to the high impact pulses, they do a great job of putting high damage in and deleting people while still being longer range weapons that have lower zoom, so they're not as jarring. Then you even compare this to something like Mida Multi-Tool, which I think the 200 RPM scouts are really the only ones that have a remote chance, and Mida uniquely is the only weapon I think at this point that has the remote chance of competing with the current metagame as a scout rifle. Mida is just more forgiving in terms of aim assist and in terms of rate of fire, and the rate of fire makes a big difference because you're not as punished for missing, which any player is going to miss at some point. And then on top of that, the Mida does still have things like high cals with a high rate of fire. It has the radar up. It has no distractions to mitigate one of the biggest weaknesses of scout rifles, which is receiving flinch. And it also just has a faster time to kill at 0.9 seconds. So I don't know. This weapon is really cool. And this is, I want to say, the best probably 180 scout possible. And it just still doesn't cut it. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Take it easy, guys.